we're going to use what we have been learning about fractions, decimals, and percents to work with kind of some benchmark fractions that you should memorize. If you memorize what these fractions are as both decimals and percents, it's going to help you a lot just in life in general as you're out shopping and want to know what a sale price is. There's just lots of ways that we can use these benchmark fractions. So let's refresh our memory first of all on the fact that percent is out of 100. So we have a couple hundreds grids here. The first one is shaded in with 84 shaded in, so that's 84 out of 100. That's the fraction. And then the decimal is 84 hundredths, and the percent is 84%. The only thing that I would add on this fraction is a lot of times we want to simplify to make it the smallest that it could be. So for 84 and 100, just by quick glance, I see that they're both even, so we could start there. I also know that 4 can go into both of those. So if I divide 84 by 4, I get 21 for the numerator. Oops. And if I divide 100 by 4, I get 25. So that would be 84 hundredths in its simplest form. If we look at the next box and how many are shaded in, I'm going to count by 10, starting with the top row. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66 out of 100. And then we know that percent is also out of 100 or per 100, so that would be 66%. And then we know that that second place value with decimals is the hundredths place, so we're going to say 66 hundredths. These two are both even here on the fraction, so let's simplify it. If I cut them both in half, I get 33 fiftieths. And the only things that can go into 33 are 1 and 33, 3 and 11, and none of those numbers go into 50 to make it any smaller. So we are finished with that one. So just as I quickly talked about, we know that with decimals, the first place past the decimal is the 10th place, and the second place past the decimal is the hundredths place. Hundredths is important because percent is per 100. It's always out of 100. That's what we want to get on our assignments and tests. So if we think of that and remember that, let's look at some of these fractions. A half. Well, if you get half of the questions right on your assignment, you would have a 50, not sure why that's not staying there, 50%. There we go. And then if we think of it like money, we have half of $1. $1 is 100 pennies, so there's that hundredths again. We could put the 0 on the end, but also we don't have to. It's optional. I'm going to come back to 1/3. If I cut 100 into fourths, so again, I'm going to think money on this one. $1 is 100 pennies. We want 100 for percent. If I'm thinking about my coins, 1/4 of $1 would be 25 cents. And therefore that would be 25%. A fifth. Well, if I break 100 into 5 different pieces, so I'm thinking in my mind, what times 5 is 100? We know that that would be 20. So 20% and then 0.20, or we could say 2/10 or 20 hundredths. All right, if I go back up to my fourth, and if I cut a fourth in half, well, that means that each of those fourths get cut into 2 pieces. So then we have an eighth. So I'm going to cut my 25% in half. But how do we do that? Because 25 is not even. So I'm going to think, okay, 24. 24 is even. So there's 12. And then I've got 1 left over. I'm going to cut that in half. So we have 12.5% for an eighth. And then if I change that into a decimal, we are going to say 125, because I moved that decimal 2 places to the left. 1, 2. So all 3 of those move over, and it's 125 thousandths as a decimal. And then the last one, before we go back up to the thirds, is a tenth. Well, I know that if I have 10 dimes, I have $1. So 10 sets of 10 and 100. So 10%, or if we're thinking money, there's 10 cents, or we could just say 1/10 with that 0 not on the end. Now, if I cut 100 into 3 pieces, well, again, that's not even. So the closest that I could get would be 33 times 3 gets me 99. Boy, that's close. But we have 1 piece left over, so we need to cut that into thirds, right? And so we would have 1 of those. So, hope I'm not making this too complicated, but if we divide 1 divided by 3, we would get 0.33333 repeating forever and ever. And we know that if a number is repeating, we can simply write it with the number that repeats and a line over it. So that decimal right here would be 3 with a line over it showing that it repeats. Now, technically for the percent, we would say 33 1/3%. A lot of times you're just going to see it as 33%. So because it's 33 1/3, if we would double that, we would have 66 2/3. So a lot of times when we have 2/3, that 66, that 6 repeats forever, so we round it up to a 67. So let's look at using some of these. So I went through those pretty quickly, but let's use some of these benchmark easy ones to help us with some other ones. So here we have 4 tenths. We know that both of those are even, so we could do this one of 2 ways. 4 tenths. Well, 1/10 is 10%. So if I have 4 tenths, I'm going to take that 10% times 4 and get 40%. And then also 4 tenths. Tenths is a place value. So 4 tenths. So we got to say it the mathematical way. Instead of 0.4, if we use those place values, man, they help us a lot. 3/4. Well, let's look back. 1/4 was 25%. I have 3/4. Well, if I know that I have 25% for 1/4, I'm going to take that times 3 because I want 3/4, and that would be 75%. Again, if we think money, 1/4 is 1/4, and we have 3/4, we would have 75% or 7/500 as the decimal. All right, 4/5. Well, let's look back. 1/5 was 20%. We now have 4/5. So 20%, that was 1/5, times 4 is 80%. We write that as a decimal. It would be 80 hundredths or 8 tenths. Either way is fine. All right, let's do a few more. All right, 2/3. So we know that 1/3 is 33 1/3%. So we want 2/3. So we need to double that. Well, 33 doubled is 66, and then 1/3 plus 1/3 is 2/3. So technically it's 66 2/3%, but a lot of times we will round that to 67%. If we change that to a decimal, it's that instead of 3 repeating every time, we're going to have a 6 repeating every time because we doubled it. All right, 2/8. We could think of this as one of two ways. Let's go back to eighths. And we would have that 12.5% or 125 thousandths. But we can also use our skills of simplifying. And 2/8, both even. So let's cut them both in half. Half of 2 is 1. Half of 8 is 4. And now we have 1/4, and we know that that is 25% and 25 hundredths. Well, 3/8. We can't simplify that one. So 3/8. Let's go back to our 1/8, which was 12.5%. or 125 hundredths. That means that we're going to take that 25% that we just had for 2/8, and we are going to add that 12.5% onto it. Okay, so this was 2/8 right here, because that's what we got up here, plus our 1/8, because we need 3/8, right? So let's add those together. We get 37.5% or 37.5%, which means that we're just going to move that decimal over and get 375 thousandths. So this chart right here, the blue table, is going to be very important to you to memorize. If we know these benchmark fractions, they are going to help us with lots of other fractions. We can break them down, decompose them, just like we did here with the 3/8, and use our knowledge that we have to help us figure out other problems. And that just makes math and life so much easier. So I really want you to use this table. I really want you to commit it to memory so that we can use it to solve problems much faster.